what it is, guys? It's your boy Blastphamoushd, and today is officially scary day. Creepypastas and try not to get scared challenges. Try not to get scared challenges might not happen. Depends on how brave I am when I pull the video up. If I release a try not to get scared challenge tomorrow and not today, you know what happened, because I was scared. I've never heard a Slenderman creepypasta, and I love creepypastas. They scare the living crap out of me. Which is why I don't do these videos more frequently. Lego.
Human-like figure moved about the thick trees with no struggle at all. It was as if it was floating. It made no noise, and the only movement seen was the creature lunging forward. It was graceful, yet terrifying. My eyes grew as I watched it skim over a frozen lake and back onto the trees. I tried to make out its facial features, but I couldn't. Perhaps it was the fog, or my lack of concentration. I was just relieved that I hadn't seen its face, though I tried. I'm sure it was just as horrifying as the tentacle-like bones extruding from the creature's back. Time stood still, and I froze the closer I got to it. Why was I approaching this thing anyway? That, I still don't know. Something about it was inviting, though. Something about it made me want to come to it. My heart was pounding at a fast rate, but my legs were moving faster as I chased the creature.
Well, you know he's not black. That's real. Because this sounds like bad decision-making 101.
It turned a sharp corner and I turned right behind it, but stopped myself, dead in my tracks, when I saw that it had stopped itself. In front of it was a small girl, around 9 years of age. She stared up at it in horror, and I feared for her life as well as mine. I tried to wave her off, but to no avail. She seemed captivated by the creature's appearance the way I had been. She slowly stood up, and as she did, I fell back and crawled beneath a bush. I couldn't look away, and all I did was watch. The creature brought its face close to hers, and as it did, her eyes grew, and she began to shake, covering her eyes. She was terrified, and compared to her, I had nothing to be afraid of. She was only inches away from the being.
What the hell you mean you ain't got nothing to be scared of, man? You're next! What you think is gonna get done with her and then just roll off? No! No!
And she was now looking at it face to face. I'd never seen someone take in something and consider it deeply, and yet have such terror in their eyes. The little girl fell, but as I took a closer look, I could see a small chest filling in with air and releasing. She wasn't dead, but she was unconscious. I took a closer look at it, and from my observations, I concluded that the being's gender was male. It took her and dragged her behind it.
Slenderman got a penis? Word?
Slowly creeping ahead this time, and I felt the need to follow. So of course I did so with no hesitation. I was at the point that I couldn't even think. After several minutes of following, he stopped at a clearing. The trees that surrounded the empty area were draped with ropes and nooses, mutilated bodies, and limbs were hanging from them. One body had been hung slowly, I could tell. The fingers of what once looked remotely human had been clawing at its own throat, trying to break free from the noose. What was this? There had to be at least 30 murders committed here. I looked in terror at my surroundings. Guts hanging from torn skin, people with gouged out eyes. I began to panic, and as soon as I felt tears streaming down my face, then I turned my attention to the girl. The poor girl had been gutted in the short amount of time it took for me to realize where we were at. Her eyes were gone, and her limbs had been cut off, but the creature was gripping the stubs to slow the bleeding. I only cried harder when I saw her working, yet displaced lungs, and her beating heart. Everything was still working because nothing had been removed fully. She was still alive. That's when, with one movement, the creature ripped her heart away from what was keeping it beating. I gagged and almost vomited, but stopped myself. I couldn't let this happen to me, not like all those other people had. I couldn't let myself be hurt, but my body was frozen, so I couldn't turn around and run away. He then hung what was left of her body up from a rope. The surrounding trees had died. I'd noticed. He stopped all movement while hanging the child's left arm up. He knew of my presence, and he quickly turned around and faced me.
No.
Terror took over. I tried to let out a scream for help, but I couldn't. I knew this is what death himself looked like.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
He was faceless. He had no face, and yet he was the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. Right as he turned, I heard a faint shrieking noise. A very loud, ear-piercing buzzing. The kind you hear from a TV that's lost service and shows nothing but static. And in hearing this, I saw what seemed to look like static as well. Everything around me began to spin and blur into nothing but black. Though, before it did, the creature revealed to me that he did have a mouth. And how he did this still pains me to think about. How he showed no pain, but instead a murderous grin. The pale skin that should have been a face slowly stretched until it ripped open in the form of a mouth. Parts of skin were still intact, and the skin on the corners of his newfound mouth ripped upwards to form a contorted smile. I knew I was seeing what that girl had seen, and I knew I was hearing what she'd heard as well. I was now unconscious, and I knew for sure I wouldn't wake up. What happens next shocked me. I didn't know why he didn't kill me, and I didn't know why he'd taken me to a different part of the woods before I had a chance to wake up. But for whatever reason, he spared me. And I know why, now, because I've read about it.
Ooh. Pregnant. Yep. My bad.
This creature was the Slenderman, and now I've read more about him. I know now that his prey is children, and that alone is the only reason why he didn't waste his time on me. Even though he'd had the perfect opportunity to kill me, he didn't, because I wasn't a child. Maybe he simply gets a sick joy from murdering innocents, but I don't want to know. And you shouldn't want to either. I'd like for this to be the last time I ever talk about it, though it is the only time. Please be cautious, and for whatever reason you may have to go into the woods, don't.
That is African American philosophy 101 right there. Oh snap, that's a forest? I'm cool.
You decide to and you spot the Slenderman? Look away right as you do, and don't look any longer, or the same will happen to you. And trust me, once you see him, he will reveal himself to you a lot more than once. He still, to this day, follows me. Please, don't let the same happen to you too.
Bruh, and that's why I don't listen to scared creepypastas, cause that shit just scared the piss out of me.
After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed for a few seconds longer. Reaching over to switch on her bed lamp, she tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her legs over the side of the bed and heaved herself up. Checking the time on her phone, she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left the bedroom for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed her front door, a chill spread like liquid fire down her spine. It's only winter, she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan. Measuring out scoops, water, and preparing a cup kept her occupied. But as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returned, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there, innocently enough, just like always. The dead bolt was still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling. With her cup in hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided that a quick glance out of the peephole would help calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold, metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eye to the peephole. At first, she could only see an inky blackness, and somehow seemed to swirl in itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place, there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and inhumanly awkward, with bulky joints branching off into several arms, not unlike the branches of a tree. The creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was what passed as the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door with the hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare leg as she fell backwards and tried to crawl away from the door. She knew, somehow, that her mind hadn't been playing tricks on her. As she walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils, as black as the voids she first saw, snake around through the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling to not turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previous locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness.
This scares the dog crap out of me. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys want to watch the original video, because we tend to chop a bunch of parts out, the link will be in the description down below. It is by Creeps Make Pasta. This was insanely well made, horrifying as all living hell, but well made. Twisms.